Exactly. We would be the problem. So again, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, are we going to be talking with another follow-up podcast about a cannabis crisis that was created back in the old 2020? I certainly hope not. And that's where I hope discussions like this gets people informed and to speak up and do things right.
What I also worry about is I think things are changing, but I remember you can go back to when you interviewed for medical school also. Can you imagine if, you're because they always ask you about your hobbies. What do you like to do for fun?
Right.
And if you give an answer that says, oh, well, after work, at the end of the week, it's Friday, I like to go out with friends, happy hour. Yeah, that's what I do on my Fridays, and sometimes I do it on Wednesdays and Mondays, happy hour.
Right.
And happy hour is essentially cheap drinks, cheap food, friends get together and do that. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
But if someone during their medical school interview were to say, hey, on a Friday night, I like to smoke a little bit, read a good book, sit in the tub, and, that's my Friday. I don't have work Saturday or Sunday. That person, I don't think would get into school.
And again, they can't say that now because that's still federally an illegal activity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So if I worked in the Veterans Administration, the hospitals for the VA, they still random urine drug tests their employees and their doctors because it's federally illegal. Mm-hmm. Because technically that's a violation of the drug-free workplace, which is one of the federal government, parts. So but imagine now, just what you just said, now more and more parents and families are like, okay, that's fine. When I grew up, if I said that to my dad and mom, oh, you know what, we're not going to drink tonight, but Johnny's coming over and he's bringing a fresh batch of OG Kush, but we're not going to drive anywhere and he's going to sleep over. Is that okay, Mom? And we want to order some pizzas. Can you imagine the 80s saying that?
Oh, no.
Now
I was only 2 during the 80s,
but in 2020, that conversation is happening tonight.
Yeah,
in some household in Los Angeles. So some people always say, "Man, what are the things that you want to make sure people know?" And I always have some take homes I like. No cannabis for anyone under 21. I don't see this as an adolescent product. This is an adult product. Number 2, respect the power of the plant. So we have a plant, again, that has incredible potential. But we're not there yet to determine proper dosage, proper route of administration. How long should you take it? And imagine the way medical cannabis has been built for the last 20 years in California. It's not proper. If I see you as a doctor and I want to see you and you recommend cannabis to me, as it stands right now, I don't go back and see you ever again. That just doesn't make sense. The proper way is I see you and you have education and knowledge about what proper cannabis usage is, what strains used, what dosage, what formulations, what indications. Oh, if you have back pain, you should use a sativa. If you have anxiety, you should use edibles. If you have PTSD, you should use 2 joints of sativa followed by 2 edibles of indica at 4 o'clock. That level of precision is nowhere near. Right. That hasn't been established. So that's the next point, respect the power of the plant. And the last thing is about addiction. The addiction risk is real. It happens about 9% from the very first time you take cannabis. You have a 9% chance of developing an addiction to cannabis. Now, 9% sounds like, is that a lot or is that a little bit? So the very first time you use cocaine, that number is like 25, 30%. The very first time you use heroin, that number is like 25%. The first time you eat a kale salad, that you develop an addiction to a kale salad, I think it's like less than 0.0000000. Yeah.
Less than that.
So it's not 0. It's less than these other substances, but it's not insignificant.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. 9% from the very first time you ingest cannabis. There's about a 9% chance that you could develop a cannabis use disorder. Now, to lower that limit, and the biggest predictors, again, earlier onset, meaning the first time you ever try. So the younger you are that you try, and then the more frequent you use, that also escalates the rate of addiction. So that's why it's so important for us to tell our the young people, if you do use sparingly, or delay the onset from the very first time you actually ingest. So there's a huge difference between someone who starts at 12 years old versus 22. Huge difference between a high school student who uses once a month, who then uses versus who uses 4 times a month. If you're using it more frequently, or you start at a younger age, your risk of developing the addiction actually is way higher than 9%.
I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation about, yes, it's different from heroin. Yes, it's different from cocaine, but it can still be harmful. It's not benign.
Right.
These are with 15 and 16-year-olds.
Yeah.
That I'm having these conversations with. And then I have to go and try to actually figure out why they're using.
Yeah.
A lot of them aren't using because it's fun.
Right.
They're using it because they have anxiety.
Or they're depressed, or ADD.
I'm like, well, what do you mean you have anxiety? You're 15.
Right.
You're 15.
Yeah.
What else is going on?
Yeah.
Essentially. And those conversations are tough because, again, I'm coming at it from the perspective of, hey, I'm a doctor, and a lot of them already have this idea that I'm already going to tell them no to this, no to that. It's like, listen, man, I've been there. Can you talk a little bit about the effects of cannabis on brain development?
Yeah. I mean, and this is, again, you're a child adolescent psychiatrist. You know this better than I, but
I know a little bit.
Here are the facts that we know now. We know that the earlier you start using, and if you start using regularly, the more likely you will actually create memory and cognitive problems by the time you reach the age of 30. So, but if you don't start using cannabis until after 2021, you don't have those cognitive impairments when you reach the age of 30. So again, it's a substance that changes the course of brain growth and development. Yeah. Well, what else changes the brain growth and development? Alcohol, tobacco, sugar, video games, probably, Diet Cola. I mean, all caffeine, all that stuff does. So I think that's, and again, the other part that a lot of parents still, it's amazing to me they don't grasp, is that the cannabis available in 2020 is not the cannabis available in 1990. Again, parents don't, if they're not familiar with that world, they go, oh yeah, it's just weed. When I was in high school, we used a little bit. Those street percentages of THC back in 1990 was about 3 to 6%. Seizures of just cannabis seized by the police. Now, cannabis seized by the police, that average median THC content is as high as 30 to 40%.
When the THC is that high, where is this? Is the CBD level different?
Well, there's two things. Well, again, it's potency. So again, it's about potency, meaning what is the potency of THC content inside that cannabis by weight that I'm consuming. Okay. So if it's a flower, or if it's an oil, or if it's some of the harder products are called wax or shatter, or those things. Those are by weight way more potent with THC, so that when you ingest an ounce or half an ounce or whatever, the same by weight, their potencies are way level, so much higher. And that's where the differences happen. Higher potency products that are, again, 70-80% THC are going to have a huge impact on the body, brain, and mind. Again, it's like alcohol, whether you use 40 proof or 80 proof, you're going to have a way different experience based on potency. Crack cocaine is a way potent form of cocaine, which is why it was so much more reinforcing. Is higher potency THC products like wax and shatter and dabs, are they more reinforcing? Of course they are. Do people like them? Of course they do. Do some people have more adverse effects? Of course they do. And that's where some folks, unfortunately, get psychotic or confused or have impairments. One of my favorite memes on the internet that's propagated is, you see number of deaths caused every year by opiates. It'll say 70,000. Number of deaths caused every year by tobacco, 500,000. Number of deaths caused every year by cannabis, 0. And then it'll say, any questions?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And so people get there, yeah. But I say that's incorrect, because the number of overdose deaths from cannabis is 0. People don't die from intoxication and overdose like they would from heroin, but they die while intoxicated. Car accidents, they fall off roofs, they get shot, they have assaults.
It's laced with something.
Yeah.
Gets laced off.
And so, and they die. So it's not, that's false. Now, people will then say, oh, but it's nowhere near the 70,000 deaths in America from opioids. Well, that's because we don't have an equivalent cannabis product that is like OxyContin or fentanyl yet. Now, we do, again, have these 70-80% products, so they're definitely out there. So there's concern about that, again, falsely giving a false sense of security that, again, it's just weed and that it's fine. Again, I think of this as like seatbelts or, food we eat. I mean, there's risk in everything we do. There's risk in video games. There's risk in the internet. There's risk in social media. There's risk in just the air we breathe, right, particularly here in California. And so when you put it all together, when you start putting cannabis in that same category and say it's just stuff that's available in our world, but let's evaluate how risky this is to you, then suddenly we can get away from this conversation of, it's, you don't get it and, you're old, you don't understand it, to no, this is just what's out there, and let's really understand that risk and evaluate those risks a lot better. I mean, do you talk about seatbelts to your kids? I mean, is that something that comes up much?
Well, the parents tend to. I mean, people just know.
Yeah,
where
because it's ingrained in our society. But it's interesting. I grew up in a world where seatbelts were just starting to get regulated. And I remember as a kid, a lot of pushback by people saying, "You're forcing me to wear seatbelts." Well, that's my God-given right not to. So, and now, fast forward 20 years, it's not even a question. People just do it. I wonder if that's where we're heading with mask wearing. Like,
nothing's changed. You think things have changed? People just always want to. That's my right to.
That's my right to do it. Yeah, it's my right to kill myself if I want. So
yeah, man. I again, this is just what you just said within the past 5 minutes. Again, I want to go back to what was said earlier, folks. You can do whatever you want. It's your life, but I think you and I can both agree on this. If you choose to use cannabis or coke or whatever it is you choose to use, just have all the facts, have all the information. I will say this, though, for kids, I am a little bit more aggressive with 15, 16-year-olds. I'm a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
I mean, because you mentioned the brain development, and I explained this too, teenagers can typically grasp this, right? Everything that we do in the brain, I mean, this is all, it's myelin. That's too scientific of a word for people to understand, but brain development means that there are connections that are being made for proper decisions to be made in the brain.
Right.
And when you use cannabis, you're going to slow down those connections, and things aren't connecting like they should, and you're going to make worse decisions.
That's right.
Right? If you slow down the process, you only get about 26 years to get a fully formed brain.
That's right. That's right.
And cannabis can slow it down. And also, when I say slow it down, that means, again, using it excessively, using it at high potency.
Right.
And sometimes when you explain that to kids, they
get it.
They get it more.
I like the house analogy. Like, if your brain is a house and you're building a house and you want to build it with the fastest internet speed possible, right? And if you use fiber optic cords and you run it up to the basement, into the bedroom, to everywhere, and that cord is clean and it's tight and everything's good, you're going to get fast connections throughout the house. But if you use cheap material, or you do a shoddy job, or you don't put the proper covering on the cable and it's loose, or you introduce water and water gets into the cable, or termites start chewing away the cable, and then those connections don't go well. And I think about all those things in life: sleep deprivation, trauma, substances. Those are all things that interfere with that house being built, with those connections and cables being properly laid down.
Right.
It's an easy analogy. People get that. I like it because people will say, oh my gosh, well, if I screw it up now, is there a way to repair it? Of course. We can bring in a repairman. And while you're young, we can lay down new cable. We can lay down new alternate ways of getting the internet in various parts of your basement. But when you're older, that damage is just bad.
Done. It's there.
Or you go for years of neglect and you don't take care of it early. By the time you then want to look at it, you can't replace it.
Right.
And I think that's a powerful message. But again, you go back to, what is the demand for people? Why do people have such demand for cannabis? And I think that's the other part we're trying to really study and examine, is because it's so, how much of this demand for cannabis is being pushed because of the industry saying this is great, and pop culture and people celebrating, or how much of it is because there's a really interesting product out there. The demand for cell phones and smartphones is huge because these are amazing products that people want. Is that the same thing for cannabis? Is it, an amazing product that more and more people really, really want. So some of the things we're beginning to see is that most of the cannabis purchased in California is by a very small percentage of people, the people who use a lot. How many new introductions to cannabis happen every year because of billboards? We really don't know. Mm-hmm. So in other words, like how many people would never have tried cannabis now are trying it because it's readily available.
Well, it's a whole culture.
The whole culture and everything, yeah. And
they have an award show.
Yeah, and the way it's portrayed and the way it's highlighted, CBD, wellness, health. Go ahead and try some. Won't hurt you. And again, for the vast majority of people who use cannabis, it probably won't. But for those who do, 9% develop an addiction. Or for those who develop a mental health condition caused by cannabis use.
Well, let's cover that now. Yeah. So if the connection between cannabis and psychiatry, patients that we see in our offices, what does cannabis do or not do for those people? We're talking about depression. We're talking about anxiety. What happens when you mix cannabis with somebody that might be, I guess, at risk or
all sorts of things, good, bad, ugly, and everywhere in between.
Okay.
So the way I think of it, if you were a patient, I'd say, here, look, we know that cannabis has the therapeutic potential to treat mental health conditions. Mm-hmm. Can it treat depression? Can it treat anxiety? Can it treat PTSD, trauma? Sure, but the science studies right now say that it does not have that ability. On the flip side, we know that, and that's number one. Number two, cannabis, without a doubt, if you have depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, makes those conditions worse. It doesn't make them better. And that's where a lot of patients get hung up. They're like, whoa, what are you talking about? It totally makes it better. I sleep better. Cannabis may make the symptoms of your mental health condition better, insomnia, suicidal thinking, but it doesn't make the full condition better. So in other words, you may temporarily feel a little bit better, but in the long run, you're still going to be suffering problems from the depression and anxiety. And I think that's so important. Number three, surprisingly, people are shocked when they hear this, but cannabis increases the risk of suicidal thinking. Cannabis increases the impulsive behavior of people to go do things like gamble excessively or use more drugs or sleep with other people you shouldn't have, putting yourself in risky positions that then lead to potentially really traumatic situations, assaults, arrests, robbery, burglary, you name it. So the last part, of course, is does cannabis, if you take it, could you then develop, say, a depression or a psychotic illness that you would not have developed at all had you never ingested cannabis? And the story is beginning to show that, yeah, there are some people out there who are biologically vulnerable that once they start using cannabis on a regular basis, again, changes the wiring in the brain to the point that even when they stop using cannabis, what's left is a mood disorder or psychosis, a scar, if you will. And that's really tricky because then it suggests, wait a minute, we better find out who those people are who are at risk so that they don't get exposed to this substance in the future. And I think that's a really, really tricky thing, but it's an important thing that we have to do in our field.
My first patient, without going into too much detail, essentially he smoked for the first time and just completely flipped.
Yeah.
I can't go into too much detail about it, but essentially we had to just tell him, you're allergic to cannabis. Right. It wasn't laced.
Yeah.
It wasn't laced.
It
was just pure cannabis.
Yeah.
And that happens with people. And again, going back to what I initially said when we first started off, just because you've had a good experience with it doesn't mean that other people have. It might be a small percentage of people that end up in our office that have used way too much.
Yeah.
And what I often notice is it kind of starts, like you mentioned, the earlier they start, they start to smoke and they're treating anxiety, they're treating depression, they're having a tough time as a kid. And they just start using more and more. The potency starts.
Tolerance develops. Yeah.
Yeah, you develop a tolerance. Yeah. And then it's every day. It's all day. They're going to work, and then they go to work, and then they end up getting in trouble at work. They come to work smelling like weed, and it's a whole thing.
Yeah, stalled development. And that's where, again, that's part of that stereotype when people say, well, what does someone with cannabis addiction look like?
Yeah.
We close our mind's eye. We're still thinking 90s, long hair, grunge, lazy, listening to records in the basement. But that's not what it is. When you look at people who show up to treatment for cannabis addiction, all walks of life, CEOs, doctors, lawyers, old, young, ethnic minorities, white people, you name it. But all the story is the same, that their relationship with cannabis has taken an unhealthy turn. It's caused problems, and they still turn to cannabis thinking cannabis will help their problem, when in fact it just makes it worse.
And you just don't see them like
Don't
you
see
do
it.
opiates and coke.
Right.
You don't see them.
You don't
But
see
they
it because,
exist.
again, you don't see like the cannabis withdrawal. It's there, but it's not nearly as shocking and as intense as opiate withdrawal.
Could you talk about that? The
Yeah,
cannabis
and so
withdrawal?
like there is a cannabis withdrawal where if you're using regularly and then you stop, anywhere between 48 hours to 72 hours later, you can develop withdrawal symptoms, which might be trouble sleeping, nausea, not eating, a little flu-like symptoms. It's vague. It's not, what's happening. It doesn't result in death, but it still doesn't feel good. And it's enough to kind of screw up your day is what we usually say to people. So oftentimes people don't recognize that what they're going through is withdrawal. So they just think, oh, I got a bad batch. Or, you know what, I just need to use more. So they use more and then they feel better. But then just deepens the cycle of the body getting so tolerant that it has to have higher levels of cannabis in order to maintain normal body functions.
I think we somewhat got off track because we were talking about legalization. What are some concrete positives? I don't know if you can go bullet point by bullet point, but what are some concrete positives of legalization?
Well, the number one for me is if we legalize and regulate it properly is to eliminate the unregulated market. And what that means then is that there's a safer product available for people to use. So a product that's not full of pesticides or poisons is exactly what it says on the label. So that's a good thing. Number two, taking away the decriminalization part. I mean, think of how many lives have been ruined, not just impacted, but ruined by being arrested for cannabis through the years. That's a felony. It's a felony on your record if you get arrested for cannabis possession with intent to distribute. We're talking 5-10 years in federal prison. You can't get a job after that. Number three is, again, the tax revenue base. And that's always an important part, because if suddenly you have $1 billion industry or whatever, and you're not collecting any taxes that go back to the government to use to make society better, where's that money go? And so oftentimes people wonder, well, where over the last 30 years have cannabis money gone? It's gone to criminal organizations, or it's gone to underground cottage industry. So the state never realizes that. The federal government never gets that funds to reinvest into the community to mitigate the harm. So that's number three. Number four, it's just the right thing to do. It's meeting people's demand. The public has spoken, not just in our state, but in many states across, that the public wants cannabis as part of the American lifestyle. So I think we need to respect the will of the people, and that's why it should be there as a legalized service, as a legalized experience. But I think the harder part is figuring out how to do that properly to prevent addiction, to prevent public harm, other sort of negative aspects of making this more legal. Is
there any concern for big corporations? Because once money becomes a part of the equation, Marlboro, I don't know all the cigarette companies, they're going to dive right in.
Well, they already have. And again, that's what's called big weed. So big weed, a lot of cannabis companies are supported by venture capitalist money, Fortune 500 investors, very sophisticated people. It's a whole, again, industry. A few of these conventions I've been to, we're talking 30, 40,000 people. So there's a massive number of investors attached to it. I think, again, that's actually a good thing if it's regulated properly.
If regulated.
Because, again, you think like big tobacco. Now, on the face of value, they have a tremendous negative view of people view of big tobacco. But they still employ millions of people in America. There's the economic backbone of many different states. They are tax-based for many states. So there's still a debate about, what does big tobacco really do for Americans? We don't plan to get rid of big tobacco. So the same thing is about, as big weed expands, how do we do it properly so that they do it in a way that isn't predatory, that is on the up and up, and it has the best interest in people's lives moving forward. And I think that's challenging because again, people will look at, if you wanted to work for a cannabis industry, if I came out of college right now and I said to my parents, you know what, I'm going to go work for the cannabis industry, they're still going to be like, oh, really? You're going to do that? Why would you work for those people? But these are legitimate, above board, regulated businesses. And I think as we legalize more and more, they'll become more and more. What I'd like to see, again, are those partnerships between cannabis industry, governments, nonprofits, university, and community-based organizations and centers.
So that people that don't have billions of dollars backing them can become entrepreneurs.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Or vice versa. So you don't have these big faceless corporations going into like urban centers or inner cities and
putting liquor stores.
That's right. Exactly. Disproportionately. Yeah. I mean, one of the things about big tobacco, they had all this data and all this been revealed through years about targeting lower socioeconomic parts of the cities, urban cultures, using specific marketing to try and get more business from a vulnerable population. So it's the same thing with cannabis, is that we really shouldn't stand for that. And in fact, that's where, like, if a big cannabis company partnered with an urban community to say, what does your community need? How can we help to make the community better while still selling a product that the community is asking for? And that's a little utopian, I'm sure, but I think that's
a goal.
That's the goal, and that's the start. And I think, again, a lot of people, it's interesting. I work with a lot of college students who want to get into the cannabis business, and we say to them, you should look into that, and you should. And they say, well, I didn't know I could. I said, if it's a legal, above board business that's regulated in the state, of course you can look at that. Now, the irony is that at UCLA, we can't endorse any of that. We can't take any money from cannabis industry because that's a violation of federal law. We can't promote students to go into working for a cannabis industry. But those are things I think we're going to change over time eventually and modernize our thinking.
So right now, you mentioned earlier, this is what the business would be about. Cannabis, THC, CBD, some component of that. If you take out the THC, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a practicing psychiatrist. People have these questions of me all the time. CBD, how beneficial is it really in comparison to just smoking regular cannabis? What are we doing here?
I never even heard about CBD until 3 years ago, and then suddenly I can go down to my local drugstore and there it is on the shelf.
It's everywhere, yeah.
Or I can buy it on Groupon. And again,
it's in lotion. It's
a $20 billion projected business. Cosmetics, pets. Pets. I was in a store the other day. It was CBD infused pillowcases. So again. The concept is amazing. The idea that here is a naturally derived compound that does not alter your senses, that can promote pain relief, reduce inflammation, improve immune defenses, improve sleep, improve just a sense of wellness, and have very little side effects. Sign me up. So you can see the selling point is there. People get confused as to why is it that I can go into a Bed Bath & Beyond and buy CBD infused sheets, but I can't go to a Ralph's and buy any, THC. It goes back to 2018. There was something called the Farm Bill that got passed, which basically the United States said, hey, if you grow and sell hemp, which is a form of a cannabis plant. Okay. And hemp is defined as a cannabis plant that has less than 0.3% THC. So if you grow hemp plant, which is cannabis, you can now sell that and everything inside that plant anywhere in America. Drugstores, 7-Eleven, you name it. So that's why on the shelves, when we see CBD-infused gummies on Groupon, it's a legal seller because they're selling CBD-infused products that were derived from a hemp plant that did not have THC above 0.3%.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very strange world because, again, it's very confusing to the average person. It's confusing to me when I go and say, well, how are they able to sell CBD? That's regulated. That's still technically CBD is still Schedule 1.
CBD is
Schedule 1.
Okay.
In the federal government's eyes. Schedule 1 when it's not derived from a hemp plant. When it comes from any other plant that has THC above 0.3%, that's Schedule 1.
Okay.
So it's very confusing. So at the end of the day, the story on CBD is that, the science is beginning to show that it definitely helps with pain. It definitely probably helps with inflammation. It does help with sleep and anxiety. But again, what dose? Who knows? How to take it? Gummies, lozenge, puff, vape pen? Who knows? How long before it wears off its wellness? Nobody knows. How many times a day should I take it to maximize it? What time of day should I take it? Nobody knows.
On a population level.
Yeah, on a population, we're nowhere near that. But so a lot of my patients say, hey, doc, what do you think of me trying it? I say, listen, I'm not going to stop you. But I always say the following. If you're going to try it, use it from a regulated dispensary. Keep notes on it very closely. Try and be consistent how you take it. And you tell me what happens. So oftentimes patients will come back and say, I tried it for 2 weeks at night, every night, same time, and I noticed no difference. Well, then it's not really work. That helps. That's informative. Instead of to say, on Monday I took it at 2, I didn't take it again to Friday morning, and then I didn't take it again to Saturday night, and then I mixed it with alcohol. I have no idea whether it's working or not. So that's helpful to have patients inform us how they're using and whether or not that made a difference or not.
That's what the research says.
That's right.
So in terms of the research for cannabis itself, is there any consensus on what cannabis is effective for, or positive for? There
is. And so right now, as of 2020, there's a summary book called that's produced by the United States National Academy of Sciences called The Health Effects of Cannabinoids and Cannabis. I think that's the title. And it's a summary of all the scientific work that's been done on cannabis since the last 40, 50 years. They concluded, and this is 2017, so again, 3 years have passed, that cannabis is good for chronic pain. That cannabis is very good for nausea and vomiting caused by chemotherapy that you use for cancer treatment. The cannabis is really good, or is good if you have a nerve condition called multiple sclerosis and have something called muscle spasticity. Your muscles tighten up and contract, and it's very, very painful. And that's it. The rest of it is we're not sure if it works, but there's enough scientific data to say, it does work for chronic pain. But what kind of pain? There's different kinds of chronic pain, right? There's musculoskeletal pain. There's neuropathic pain. There's emotional pain. So there's diabetes pain. So as of right now, it just says the condition of chronic whole body pain. Your body just is in pain. So even that's still not precise enough, but it's a starting point. So now, since 2017, there have been other studies that have agreed or disagreed or added to that body of knowledge. But again, as of today, if a patient walks to me into my office and say, what dose should I take for chronic pain? I technically, by law, by California law, I can't recommend, or I can't make a prescription. That's number one. I can make a recommendation to use cannabis, but I cannot make a recommendation with specificity. So I can't say again, Thomas, use OG Kush 3 times a week, and on every other night, take down an edible of whatever brand, Kiva brand chocolate, and use 1 vape pen throughout the day. I can't say that right now. That's a prescription. Right. I can make a recommendation that, you know what, based on your condition, I believe cannabis may help your condition. And that's the level of the recommendation that the Medical Board of California is comfortable with us doing.
There are 3 things at this point that I think, because I don't know who's listening to this. It could be a parent. It could be people that already know about cannabis. It could be people angry about to write us on YouTube. I don't know. But let's assume that there are people that don't know anything about, this is their first time listening to a podcast. I think we've laid out what cannabis is. I think CBD and THC, that's been laid out. You mentioned 3 things: edibles, you mentioned wax, and you mentioned dabs. Yeah. What the hell are those?
So these are all different kinds of cannabis and how you can consume it. So
let's start with edibles.
Yeah, I got so cannabis products come in a whole host. And if you were walking in a dispensary, that's what's so interesting. So my first, I guess, called homework assignment to those who are curious is go into a legal dispensary if you're over 21 and ask questions. Look around. Become familiar with what products are being sold and how they're being sold. As an example, the most classic way of ingesting cannabis, of course, is smoking it. flower. They call it just smoking flower. You just put it in a bowl or you roll it up in a cigarette and you smoke a joint. That's the classic way of ingesting cannabis. But you also can ingest it orally. You can eat it. And that comes typically in a form of an edible, like a gummy. But you can also drink it just in standard tea or just a soda. And that would all be kind of oral ingestions of cannabis. Then you can also take what we call a high potency product, like a vape pen, which would be an oil, or dab, wax, or shatter. What these are high potency containing.
Before you even move on to dabs,
yeah,
can you lay out what the potential problems are with edibles?
Oh, sure. Okay. So edibles, unlike smoking, you ingest it orally, so it goes into your stomach, and it's going to take a little longer for it to take effect. Mm-hmm. So what happens with some people is they take a gummy, and they think it's like smoking cannabis. Oh, I should feel something right away, and they don't. So then they end up taking a second gummy, and then a third gummy, because it tastes good. And then within the first 15 minutes, they've now taken, instead of say like 2 or 3 milligrams of cannabis or 5, they've now taken 40. And if they're a novice user, as the body level goes up over the next hour and a half, they can then reach a point of intense response. And also because edibles are much slower getting rid out of the body. So let's say you have an intense dosage, it'll still take 8, 10, 12 hours to get rid of. So it's not like alcohol where it metabolizes a little quicker. Metabolism off cannabis sometimes can be slow. So that's why if you're intoxicated and experiencing adverse effects, that could be problematic because you might be stuck in that zone for a while.
The reason why I even thought that would be something very important, I'm okay with cannabis. I really just have this is my own personal issue with right. edibles.
Yeah,
because the stuff that I've seen with edibles, again, this is us professionally in practice. These are young people, by the way.
Right.
Above the age of 26, do what you want. But young people, I've seen ingest a cookie and do what you just mentioned.
Right.
But even when it's not overeaten,
right,
they have such a reaction to it. I forgot what the molecule is called when it gets metabolized in the liver.
Right. Yeah, but it's a long fancy name. Yeah,
it's a big fancy name. But essentially, what you just described was the fact that when you inhale something and you inhale cannabis, it goes directly into the bloodstream.
It goes directly to the bloodstream, to the lungs, to the brain, and then bypasses the liver, and then ultimately, is just excreted out in our urine and our poo. So
there's no conversion.
No.
But when you eat it, it goes from your
stomach to your blood to your liver,
and it's converted to something.
Kidneys, it's converted to something else, and that metabolite lingers around a lot longer. And it's just a different way of taking it in. So it all makes sense. Like if you have an asthma and you use an inhaler, you use a puffer and you get an effect immediately because you go from your lungs right to your lungs. But lots of people with asthma, they take pills to kind of open up their lungs, and that just takes a while. So again, route of administration, how you take it in matters because that will change your experience with it. These high potency products, and they have all sorts of fancy names.
Now we're going to dabs. And okay.
So essentially, these are high potency products that look like goo or real waxy substances, like caramel, toffee pudding, beeswax, real hard plastic candies. And the way they're used is that they're usually high, they're fired up. So people light them up, usually with a high flame, like a butane lighter, or they'll melt them on an aluminum foil. And as they melt, the fumes that they give off are then usually inhaled directly into the lungs. So it's essentially taking a high potency product quickly into the lungs. They're not eaten, they're not ingested, but because they have very high levels of THC in them, 60 to 70%, and you're inhaling them, you're getting them into your lungs quickly and rapidly. And same thing, you'll have a very powerful effect right away.
60 to 70%.
Potency, that's right. And so the same thing, though, that's why when it's that potent, you can take the same amount as, say, just a flower, but it's still going to linger around the body a lot longer because it's a much more potent product. It's going to bind to the body's receptors more tightly and it'll last longer. So a single use of a dab or a wax or shatter. And why is it called dab? Well, you're dabbing into your supply. You take a little dab out of this little like waxy substance, and then you put it and you dab it on a nail, and you heat up the nail and then the fumes, and then you inhale that. And there's a million YouTube videos on this too.
Yeah.
You can do it off a potato, all sorts of interesting things. But for folks in the audience there, again, they say, well, is that illegal? No. If you're over the age of 21, if you buy high potency products in a dispensary and they tell you how to use it this way, that is not illegal. It feels illegal, right? But using all these various products.
Feels dangerous,
Yeah, and again, that's part of your education campaign. That's part of the question is that should high potency products be illegal? Should there be an upper limit to what a person can buy in a regulated dispensary of THC? And to that answer, we don't have an answer. We don't. Again, like take cigarettes. Cigarettes, an average cigarette has like 3 milligrams of nicotine. Well, you can make nicotine products that are way, 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 way more potent in the cigarette, but they don't because they're bounded by law not to. So, and that's part of the ultimate question is, again, what is the ideal THC potency that's enough to give people a good recreational experience but minimize public health harmful impacts? And to that question, I have no idea.
It's tough. Tough.
Very tough. Yeah.
So we're getting towards the end. My final question for you. Well, it might be a series of questions, but where is the direction of research headed?
Well, wherever we can get money for. Wherever we can get money for. I mean, I can tell you, here are the essential questions we have. We want to know, at least at UCLA, what we're looking at is, number one, how do we use cannabis to alleviate pain, to treat pain better? And we're talking physical and emotional pain. So I foresee us going down the route of trying to understand clinical trials. So we can say this version of cannabis works really well for pain or for sleep or for anxiety. That's what we'd love to do. Number two, I want to look at, again, how do we stop people from developing cannabis addiction? Cannabis addiction is terrible. It ruins lives. People suffer. We don't want any of that. We want to keep all of this in the lane of people being able to enjoy cannabis recreationally in an adult fashion without harmful effects. So a lot of our research questions are going to be, what's the best way to treat cannabis addiction? Medication, psychotherapy. What's the best way of getting people to identify with cannabis addiction early on to then go in and get treatment before it's too late? There's a huge difference between coming into treatment today versus going into treatment 3 years from now. So lots of various things like that. For me, again, if just involved with the sports psychiatry world, I'm fascinated to know, how does cannabis impact athletic performance? Does it make you a better fighter? Does it make you a better basketball player, or does it hurt? We've had some professional athletes say, without cannabis, my career would have been over years ago. I've had other athletes whose careers never got started because of cannabis. So really interesting thing. And along the way, we're going to find out public health questions that we never even dreamed of that are going to come up. So as an example, before the pandemic hit, there was a series in 2019 of men and women who young healthy people who started developing these serious lung injuries from vaping. And they ended up hospitalized in the ICU, and some of them died.
I think this was in the news.
Big time in the news, 2019, before the pandemic. There was about almost 60 deaths in America from vaping-associated lung illnesses. Young people that should not be dead, that were dead. The vast majority of those young people were vaping cannabis-related products. So it turns out that we think that why their lungs were subjected to such intense damage is that they were vaping unregulated cannabis products that had this chemical called vitamin E acetate in there that was really bad for the lungs, that would never, ever be in a regulated product. It was an unregulated product. It's cheap. It's easy. It's like, grade D meat. And customers had none the wiser. And when we started to look at that issue, when we asked some of these people, well, where did you get the cannabis? Oh, I got it in the dispensary. But the dispensary they bought it from was an unregulated dispensary. So they had no idea that what they were buying was not a tested product. So those are some of the issues that I never even dreamed of. And when we were starting to learn about that, we said, oh, we better get in front of this to understand what's in this cannabis product that's killing people off. Why is it that dispensaries are allowed to still sell this without being regulated? And again, should we even allow high potency products like this to be on the market? We don't allow, again, certain pain meds to ever be on the market, even with prescription, because of their potency. They're just not allowed. So at what point should we allow recreationally? What is that ceiling? What percentage of THC should we allow? Again, we don't know. And
right. It's tough. It's tough questions. You know, I think one of the reasons why you're here is because I think you are able to look at this from an unbiased, objective perspective, which I think is very important. Mm-hmm. We don't have the answers to these questions, but we're willing to look at the evidence and try to figure it out. Yeah. That's important.
Absolutely. And on our website, I'll put a quick shout out for that. It's cannabis.semel.ucla.edu.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you.
Cannabis.semel, semel.ucla.edu. We also have a Twitter handle at UCLA Cannabis. And right now, during the pandemic, we started to do monthly conversations about cannabis, where we do just what you're doing here. We bring in a cannabis expert and we go into a deep dive on various topics. We've had one on cannabis and lung injury. We've had one on cannabis and CBD, and we're doing one tomorrow actually on just what it's like to be a cannabis researcher and all the barriers that we face. So this is by putting out what we think to be our good academic products will hopefully stimulate a whole new generation of researchers to get involved and start spitting out research that makes a difference.
Is there any other way that people can support UCLA Cannabis Research Initiative or some other place in the country?
Yeah, absolutely. They can go to our website. They can sign up. They can join our mailing list. They can donate if they want to donate. Tax-free, tax benefits. We can do that. Or if you're a student in the Los Angeles area, college, medical student, or research, give us a call. We're always looking to do collaborations. And if you're a community-based organization and you have stories and ideas, we're open to collaborations. We can do education, we can do trainings, and we just want to learn more. We're just hungry for talking about cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say this enough. I think the whole point of this discussion was not to go for, not to go against, but to just lay out what we know.
There you go.
That's it.
There you go.
That's it. So again, cannabis enthusiasts, anti-cannabis people who don't care, relax.
Yeah, that's super good.
All right. Anything else you want to bring up?
No, this is great. Again, cannabis.semel.ucla.edu. Take a look at that. And thanks so much for having me on the show.
All right. Fantastic. We're all finished. Thank you so much.